Welcome to In the Funnel. My name is Mark Cox. In the Funnel is a group of sales coaches and consultants that help B2B sales teams dramatically improve revenue. Clients come to us when revenue growth is stagnated, or their sales team is not meeting expectations, or they need to recalibrate their sales and go-to-market plan for the upcoming year. Our clients have enjoyed tremendous success working within the funnel, and please hear it straight from them by listening to the testimonial section of this website. What they'll tell you is there's two things that make us unique and different in our space. Number one, we have a process and a methodology. First, for understanding your current state, and then second, for building your sales and go-to-market plan for the upcoming year. The second thing that makes us unique and different is that everybody within the funnel has run a material sales organization in their recent past. We're all practitioners. We don't have any theorists or teachers, and what that means is we can get in front of your sales team and run the next sales meeting, or join them on their next sales call to close your next large prospect. All of us have a passion for professional, disciplined, process-driven sales, and we'd be delighted to talk to you if you're looking to grow revenue for your company. Please feel free to reach out to us through this website at info@inthefunnel.com or by telephone. Thanks for taking the time to watch this.
The question, what content are you going to talk about in a real strategic business discussion with your client? Is it product focused, inside out, more of the same, or is it customer centric? What the customer experiences, and then you want to talk about more than just features, functions, benefits, value proposition, and deal. You want to talk about the whole execution, also processes, systems, or structures, knowledge, the resources, and of course, the strategies, the relationships. So all the three levels, which I think, if I would have to summarize this in three principles, if companies really want to make a difference, they should think about how do we redirect our planning in a more collaborative way? How do we reconfigure our execution so it's absolutely 5-star for our customers? And how do we also reallocate the resources? So again, planning, execution, and resource, this is what you want to have in mind. And then I must say, it works in pretty every industry I have seen so far.
Team, that was Christoph Senn, and he's the founder and CEO of Valuecreator, a software company helping organizations build high-value relationships, and they're advancing the practice of value co-creation across industries. Christoph is an Adjunct Professor of Marketing at INSEAD, and he's also the Co-Director of the INSEAD Marketing and Sales Excellence Initiative. Obviously somebody we're super keen to speak to today. One of the things that prompted me to go and find Christoph was I read a great article in Harvard Business Review that he wrote called Stop Selling, Start Collaborating: The Secret to Fostering Lasting Client Relationships. It's a terrific read. And in it, he shares his framework for really building better relationships with your most important clients and understanding what's most important to them. And he calls that framework the triple fit canvas, where we break it down into a planning phase, an execution phase, and then a resourcing phase. In the planning phase, we talk about strategies, relationships, and communication. In execution, we think about solutions, processes, and systems. And on the resourcing side, we think about the people and the structures and the knowledge they share. This is right in our sweet spot with the Selling Well podcast gang today, because we're always focused on providing you with strategies, processes, tools, or frameworks that you can apply to your business today. And this is that times 10. This is perfect for a quick listen, something you can apply to your biggest customers immediately. And I think you'll enjoy the conversation. We talk a lot about real life examples of providing or applying this framework to to getting the results you want. So enjoy today's discussion with Christoph Senn. Here he is. Christoph, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast here today. I was so excited to speak with you.
Thank you, Mark, for having me. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here.
So Christoph, one of the things that I thought was, I was so excited about today, we're going to be talking about the article that I read that was recently published in HBR, Stop Selling and Start Collaborating, the secret to fostering lasting client relationships. And I just think this is such a hot and important topic for everybody listening to this podcast in professional sales today. You've got an amazing framework we'll get into, but maybe as a little bit of context for the folks listening today, would you mind sharing a little bit, the short story about your journey in professional sales? Because I think you've got an amazing background and set of credentials.
Well, thank you. The journey is probably less spectacular as you may think, but I'm a trained teacher. So working with people was always close to my heart. I just figured out when I finished my training that I didn't have the patience to work with kids. So I went into higher levels of education, but on the other hand, it was also a big adventure for me to dive into professional selling, because I thought after a few years of working as a teacher, these companies all around, they also look interesting. So I gave it a shot and did some studies in marketing and sales. I even completed the PhD in marketing and sales, but that all took me then to a role more in business. And there is, I think, the crossroad where I really learned that some companies do a better job than others. Some people do a better job. And I think we may come back on that. The origins of the framework we could recently feature in this HBR article, they really go back to one incident I was experiencing in my young years as a sales person when I got a job from the CEO, but I can relate to that story and tell it a little bit later. But back to your question, I think I always had this passion for people, but also for business. So all these experiences working as a teacher, working also in business as a sales leader. I left industry then having run a global sales organization with 43 countries. So wow. International sales is certainly something I know a little bit about, but I could then bring it together in two ways. And one way is that I work now at INSEAD in Fontainebleau. I'm a professor of marketing and sales there. And on the other hand, I'm the founder and chairman of a small consulting boutique company, which just supports mid-size and large organizations in this topic, moving from value selling, if you will, to value creation. And I think the title here, Stop Selling, Start Collaborating, is certainly a contradiction in itself, because usually when you train salespeople, you say more is more, go faster, go better. But we really found in our studies that sometimes it pays off to stop and reflect and then go back into the game with a different approach. So in a nutshell, for me, sales needs a different perspective more than ever before.
I couldn't agree more, by the way, and we're gonna unpack that topic. And Christoph, it's so exciting to speak to you, because to have this perspective in academia, you know, on our show, we've had folks like Frank Cespedes from Harvard, who you might know, or Philip Squire out of the UK with Consalia, and now yourself, folks who are sort of driving the importance of sales, not just marketing, but sales in academia to standardize and evolve this business profession. It's not a trade, it's a profession, and it's folks like the three of you that are really driving that on the front end. But I love the approach about the title, because Stop Selling and Start Collaborating, to me, and you have multiple examples in terms of the framework we're going to talk about. I think when a salesperson steps away from trying to help themselves and starts to step into trying to help the client or the organization they're working with get a better future, a better business outcome, the natural outcome from that is, more revenue or more success. And you have multiple examples with, Schindler Elevator and Vodafone and a variety of other organizations that have done it. But let's start at the beginning here. And I know you publish on lots of different topics and obviously teach on a number of different topics. How did you zone in on this particular topic, working with existing clients to build much better relationships and move to value creation? What prompted you to do the research and start down this path, Christoph?
Well, the prompt came when I was charged with redesigning a sales force in my former company. I was working in a large Swiss conglomerate. We were selling pretty much everything from shoes. The brand was Bali, well known. We had hotels, we had a couple of military equipment, and we had also coating systems and aerospace equipment. And I was in the coatings business. So it was a global business where you were calling on companies like Intel, on Motorola, on Sony, JVC, BMW. So a couple of large, well-known brands across industries. And I was there trying to sell systems as good as I could, because I'm not an engineer by training, but you learn the ropes and you go in there and you support the key leader of the deal. And then soon after, we found we were just kind of wasting our resources. We're not closing enough deals. And then in the discussion with the CEO of the unit, we said, okay, how can we change that? Long story short, we found one example, one relationship, which was handled perfectly well by one individual. And the CEO then said, okay, you're going to talk to that gentleman, which I did. And after a couple of cool discussions, I learned that he had a completely different style. When I was asking him, what's the secret of your success? He simply said flat out, I have no idea, but I do whatever is necessary to make my client successful. Not to sell more or to sell better, but to make my client successful. And I think this is also what people like Frank or Philip promote years back already. I can fully support that. And I think this is still what our research then showed, practiced by only few of the sellers we see, maybe 10, 15%. But in my example, the prompt for the research, then I wondered, what if we would kind of frame this approach? What if we would kind of conceptualize it and bring it forward to our teams? So 25 years back, I started with a sketch, which then became also the key framework for my PhD, which was a first study on 3 companies on that subject. And then from then, we really worked a little bit like in medicine or engineering. You always do experiments. Does this work or does it not work? And then we had a couple of miserable failures, I have to admit that. But finally, we arrived at a solid framework, which we now call this triple fit canvas, understanding that the logic, which was, I would say, previously given to business relationship, was not wrong, but it was not paying off in the best possible way. So everybody was saying, okay, we need a strategic fit. And when you look at a strategic fit, you know that from mergers acquisitions theory and other related fields of research. If you have a strategic fit, if, for example, the geography footprint or the culture of both companies is a fit, then it may work also in the collaboration between a seller and a buyer. However, when we went deep, we found that there are so many other building blocks which could interfere or block or prevent the deal. We then said, okay, it is about the fit, but it is not just one mythical strategic fit. It is a threefold fit. First, you got to have the planning right. Then you have to get the execution right. And finally, you also have to allocate the resources in a proper manner. And this is what the gentleman I was meeting with in my early stage of the career, his name is Ernie, practiced. And so I owe him forever this inspiration, I have to say.
And I'm assuming Ernie gets a piece of all the frameworks you sell in the consulting. I'm sure
we're still negotiating that deal.
Hey, Ernie, if you're out there, if you need an agent.
Exactly, yeah.
So by the way, did you say, Christoph, that you ended up taking this framework and it became part of a PhD you did in professional selling at some point?
Yes, but again, that was 20 plus years back. And
right.
The version you have here is probably looking a little bit like Windows 12 versus Windows 1.
Right.
So yeah.
So for everybody listening, the reason this is so incredibly relevant to everyone listening, whether you're a CEO, a sales leader, or even a salesperson working with a major account today, some of the questions originally that Christoph was looking to answer as part of this framework were, the two most fundamental questions, I think, for all of us. What are the building blocks of successful relationships, business relationships? And then the second one, how can companies create kind of future-proof relationships that survive even during times of uncertainty? And the interesting thing about this framework, when you read the HBR article, which is actually May-June 2022, for those listening, May-June 2022, for the YouTube folks, that's the HBR article. But the interesting thing about this is there's a couple of examples, Christoph, that you share where the framework was applied when things weren't going well, like with Blockbuster and Sonos. It started off very interesting start to the article where they're getting in a room after a 10-year relationship and the parties don't think things are working well. And it's how do we earn the right to kind of get through this type of framework? So let's talk about the different stages. And you came up with, within the triple fit canvas, there's almost this 3x3 matrix or 10 kind of areas where planning, execution, resources. But there's certain steps, and the starting point, the first step is you do a relationship maturity check. Tell us a little bit about that step one, how we get started applying this framework.
Thank you. I think this is really the key point to start with. For everybody's understanding, I would appreciate if I could conceptualize in 1 minute briefly again the framework.
Sure.
Based on an example I was referring to earlier with my friend Ernie. So Ernie was managing our relationship with my former company with IBM. IBM was our most strategic global customer. We did hundreds of million per year. With them. So over a couple of years, this is the billion-dollar customer.
Wow.
And when I was talking to Ernie, he said, look, I may not have a full idea of what I'm doing, but I do whatever I can to make IBM successful. And when we then dig deeper, he said, look, it's not about that I sell the solutions only. Nobody can be the specialist for all the solutions IBM is buying. And also IBM has a couple of different sales folks to sell to their customers. But Ernie, I know IBM's strategy. And that's not the strategy you get out there in the public domain. That's not the strategy you can read from the business press or in the analyst meetings. This is insider information. So he knew the decisions IBM was going to take with relevance for the next 5 to 10 years for us as a supplier. And when I heard that, I said, oh my God, this is no longer the value selling thing here. We're really talking about strategic thinking way beyond whatever we have heard in the good old days. I still value the spin selling approach from Neil Rackham. Miller Hyman, of course, is perfect, but it is compared to this strategy perspective, still just taking us this far, but not beyond a certain point. So I think what we we're fortunate to figure out is a framework which is complementary to all the preparation frameworks, the gold sheets, blue sheets, green sheets from Milheim. That's fantastic for single deals and so on. But for the strategic perspective, you need to know the strategy. And that brings us to the framework and the process. In a nutshell, if you know the strategy, you also have to establish and maintain the right relationships.
Yes.
All levels, hierarchy, but also personal, informal relationships, as good as it could get. And finally, you also have to perhaps change the communication style, which means you go from more adversarial negotiating style to a more collaborative problem-solving style. So all these three blocks, strategies, relationship, communication, they help you to plan properly. And then in the framework, there's a second level, which we call the execution fit, where you talk about solutions. And you see, it starts not with solutions, but the solutions are derived from this understanding at the planning level. So the planning fit drives the execution fit, where you talk about all your products, services, solution packages, and then the processes and the systems to execute. So a second level execution fit will then be complemented by a third level we call resource fit, where also my friend Ernie was telling me, look, I don't have the authority. I cannot order everybody in the organization to help me, but I have a number of allies, my volunteer army of helpers. Mm-hmm. So it's all about people, but it's also about the structures. We may build a workaround a given structure, or we may have a new approach for a better structure. And finally, we also have to share the knowledge between both companies. So people, structures, and knowledge, this helps to allocate the resources properly. And when you put these three together, planning fit, execution fit, and resource fit, you really get to this 3x3 matrix, which is then the basis for a maturity check. And to finish up with the question here, the maturity check is a very simple process, but what we always should have in mind is that it's no longer the inside-out view, which we see sometimes well executed when you see companies applying, for example, say net promoter score. But the net promoter score is a great first general indicator. But then you want to go deeper and say, okay, where are really the issues? And when you use, for example, the triple fit canvas framework, you can contrast your own rating in 9 building blocks, which describe the performance in relationship with the customer's perspective. So the beauty is that you can do this in parallel, so super fast, just software-based. You go and say, in 3 days, we have the ratings, and then you can contrast this. And that's one of the discussions. We may go into detail more afterwards, which we, for example, had with the folks at Sonos and Best Buy, when we said, okay, this relationship is 10 years old, but it somehow is a little bit backsliding. Now let's find out where we are. Let's do a maturity check and then have a thorough and also honest discussion. So the maturity check is the starting point, which will then lead to quite some tough discussions, because you finally have to understand where are maybe the strengths, the weaknesses, and maybe also the gaps. Do we agree, or do we really have to go deep and understand what's really going on here?
Well, I think it's so interesting. By the way, folks listening, we're going to put the link to the HBR article in the show notes for today. So taking a look at that framework, so the relationship maturity sort of grid framework to do that assessment, I think what you'd recommended, Christoph, was we do that as a provider. I'm going to do that with my team internally and do some ratings. I'm also going to share it with the client so that they do it, and then we're going to take a look at those things together, which would then lead to step 2, which would be to identify those areas for improvement. But I did just want to just stay on the relationship maturity check, just as we get started for a second, the first step. Any coaching or counsel on two things. What to do, it was amazing to me reading the article that even though Sonos and Best Buy weren't having a great relationship, somehow they were still able to get the people in the room to invest some time to have this discussion. But there were detractors. And there were people in the room who said, listen, hey, just give us a couple of points of discount and we'll get to our margin. I don't know why we have to go through this process. Any advice on, hey, if I've got an important and large client relationship that may not be working perfectly well today, and we haven't taken this value creation approach, how do I actually get the other party into the room to invest in this process?
Well, I'm inclined to say send them the article, then they know.
There you go. Actually, it's not a bad idea at all, frankly.
Yeah, and in fact, this is what we advise some of our clients really to do.
Yeah.
A little bit more elaborated and professional approach is certainly that you want to search a sponsor or a coach, classic sales language, find somebody who is still able and willing to talk about the relationship, maybe beyond a certain price negotiation. And also for the Sonos Best Buy case, it wasn't easy to really get all the people in the room. I may share this little anecdote. Finally, we had this preparation and we introduced the concept here with a very short overview of the framework and said, look, this meeting, we need 1 hour. We're not going to talk about any of our features, functions, benefits, or whatever. We want to talk about the performance of the relationship, and we believe we have found a couple of deficits on our side. So we would appreciate, dear customer or customer team, if you could spend 1 hour of your time to give us a feedback based on a thorough preparation. We're going to send you a questionnaire with only 10 questions. That usually breaks the ice. And the first question is more or less a net promoter question. How well are we doing overall? Would you recommend us or anything else? And then the next 9 questions, number 2 to 10, would focus on all these 9 building blocks, 1 question each. It takes 10 minutes. And then you can consolidate these results on a scale from 1 to 5. It was a long debate in our research team, but we found the most easy to understand analogy is 5 stars. Like hotels or Amazon ratings, it can be from 1 to 5. And everybody understands that 5-star performance is the ultimate goal. And everybody can easily say, okay, you are at the moment at 2 out of 5, or you are at 4, not yet at 5, but 4. And this simple rating scale helps a lot. So it finally is probably possible in 99% of the cases that you get a team together. If that doesn't work for whatever reason, I've seen that scenario, you may want to do this just in a one-to-one, which is better than doing nothing. So my recommendation to those people who still have the challenges that they are not able to bring together 2 teams is start with a one-to-one. It may be your buyer, it may be your coach, it may be somebody from sustainability or from the customer's marketing area or quality control. Anything goes as long as you can have a decent discussion. Final anecdote from Sonos. The meeting, which was scheduled for 1 hour, was prolonged then to 6 hours because everybody said, oh, wow, this is probably a different discussion. We're going to cancel some meetings further out, and we want to continue that discussion. So finally, the hesitation could be eliminated just by showing, okay, we are not here to discuss more for our benefit. We don't want to sell more because we really want to do a better job for you. And the side product is that we may sell more. And in the article, I describe a couple of examples where the customer simply said, for the first time, you were not trying to sell something to me. So I really appreciate this discussion.
Well, it's hard to imagine they wouldn't. And I think that is one of the keys. I love the idea, by the way, of circulating the article. But if you have a process and a methodology, I think what is so helpful about this, it does delineate between the salesperson who says, hey, we want to have a kind of health check business discussion, but they're not authentically really interested in value creation. It's just their way or their process of trying to sell something. You know, there's a lot of that out there today where, hey, we'd like a discovery meeting. We want to really understand your business. But the buyer really understands that all it is part of a sales process where you're looking for me to answer certain questions a certain way. And then you're going to spike the ball and tell me you've got a solution to address that. And I think when you have a formal framework and intelligent questions and a process, and then you show that you're authentically interested in their feedback, and not insofar as it just helps me, but to really get to the right answer, it tends to be a little bit of a management 101 approach. A management consulting 101 approach. So I think that authenticity of really being open to the feedback, wanting to understand more. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Christoph, somewhere in the article, you almost mentioned, hey, ask them why 5 times so you're really clear on the feedback. So that's the step 1 that leads to then step 2 and 3, really identify the areas for improvement and then start to think through workable solutions. And you had some great examples of Vodafone and Schindler Group there. Can we speak to those phases or those steps?
Absolutely. And thank you for setting the context already. These maturity check results are indeed just the starting point. So maybe one final comment to step 1 of the process. Once you have collected the results, you also want to have a healthy consensus discussion, finally agreeing with your client, not who is right or who is wrong, but where do we think is really the meeting point or the jointly agreed performance level. And that can sometimes hurt because as a supplier, you want to have as high ratings as possible. And as a customer, you may want to put a little bit of pressure, tactical pressure on your supplier.
Yeah.
But if both parties can really step back for a moment and say, okay, honestly, if we look at it, it is not stellar, but it is also not disastrous. So it's a solid 3-star performance. But then you go into the next step, as you described, and find areas for improvement. If you are at a level 1, where, for example, if I go to one of the building blocks where you would say, okay, the processes to collaborate are not aligned at all and not effective, not efficient, then you may agree the performance is level 1 from both sides. And then this is a clear indicator for a heavy initiative to improve. So the rating alone identifies the improvement area. When it comes to higher ratings like 3 or 4, you want to start asking the question, why are we at a level 3 and not 4 or 5? Or why are we even at a level 5? What brought us there? And what may also be necessary to remain there? And the whole sequence of the next steps, number 2, 3, and 4, I owe this inspiration Simon Sinek. The why, what, how, of course, helps here a lot. But I think the why is the most important question, because when you have results, it is still a snapshot of a perception. It's a momentum, a snapshot, a moment in time, not looking back or looking forward, just what you see at the moment. However, this is the perceived reality, but understanding the root cause is key. And I want to give an example which was not shared in the article, if I may.
Please.
That came from one of my coaching sessions. So I'm coaching organizations quite frequently when they go into such a discussion, either before and after. And in few cases, I am also acting as the facilitator. The fun fact was everybody agreed that the products, the solutions were 5-star, and also the people were about 4-star. So, and also the relationship. So the classic sales approach was working well. All the other building blocks were either at a level 2 or 1.
Oh,
and
okay.
the lowest rating was in the building block strategies. So there was no understanding of each other's strategy, also no attempt to share future plans. And when we then asked the sales team, hey, why do you think the rating is so low? They said, well, the customer never shares the strategy with us.
Right.
And then the customer was laughing and said, you never asked for it.
Right. Right.
And we asked back the sales team, why did you not ask? And they said, well, shit, we didn't dare to ask. And now, what is the root cause? Is it the customer is holding the cards close to the chest, or is it just the sales team thinking that it may not work and so on? So we went on and on and on. And finally, it was a big, big step forward that both companies said, okay, we need a meeting where we can be as open as possible, but of course, full confidentiality guaranteed. This is our technology roadmap, for example. I had some of my clients with Intel, we had 15 years down the road, all the systems planned. Not every industry has 15-year roadmaps, but even if you can have a roadmap beyond 12 months or the next 3 years, this is a great, great step forward vis-a-vis competition who may not have this visibility. And when you then go into further building blocks, you start seeing a pattern when you ask again, why are our processes not aligned? Well, it may also relate to the deficit of knowledge in strategy, where you say, okay, we didn't know that you want to grow in Asia. So we didn't set up the proper structures there, but it already triggers step 3 that you start thinking about solving this challenge or this deficit. But I have to put out the caveat here because from my former role as a sales leader, I know that salespeople are very quick in judging a situation and then going for a solution. So sometimes the strategic thinking is just left out. And I know I'm also a victim of that. Sometimes I see opportunity deal and then you want to go and sign it instead of thinking, what are the options? Is it really worth it? So the next question you want to ask is, after the why, what could we do or should we do? Like a range of options. And that, of course, goes also hand in hand with more consultative selling approach, but it is not just what is the best solution for the customer from a product perspective. It's what is best when it comes to processes. How should we perhaps change our processes so it's easier for the customer to do business with us? And if you start discussing such ideas, your counterpart will definitely realize this is not about a sales pitch now. This is really about improving the performance for the benefit of the customer.
There's so many things, Christoph, to unpack, but if I were trying to summarize some of the key things I think I've heard here, one of the big ones I think is we have to earn the right for this kind of conversation with a client. And so I think your framework is a good start, is very helpful for someone who hasn't had this kind of relationship with one of their key customers in the past. Sharing the framework, I think, is helpful. Say we have a process and a methodology, and you're building trust and credibility with that particular client, that my intent is not just to build the quick financial business case that says you should buy my software, or the quick financial business case that says you should buy more product. I think the process itself could earn the right for some of this discussion, and then you got to have that authentic conversation. The second piece is we constantly have to, in my view, we've constantly got to earn the right for the attention of that client. So we have to have people in the room for this conversation that don't just understand our business, but actually do understand the client and their business, and they've done their homework, and they understand the top trends in the industry, and they understand the different needs, wants, and desires of many of the different people in the room.
Yeah.
And so where I see this working, I work with a lot of CEOs today that informally, this is actually their true intent. When they get in front of a client, it automatically goes to a strategic conversation. They never pitch software or product. They're only interested in what's happening with the client. And I think what I love about this approach and framework for everybody listening here is I think there's a way of taking that client first mentality that many successful CEOs kind of have in their DNA. And then we're adding a whole process here to make sure it's executed at an enterprise level with this maniacal focus on making sure no one ever believes our intent is just to sell some more product, because as soon as that happens, I think the whole house of cards falls down and they go, this is just another way of trying to do your basic sales 101. It's more sophisticated, but it's just another way of trying to get there. And where I find I'm sure maybe you've had examples of this, but we may be working with a client or client that when we understand what their goals and objectives are and the business strategy, that we leverage our knowledge and expertise to point them to someone else who can help for a certain area. So it's not everything that just leads to us, but it's our knowledge, our relationships, our expertise. We find some way to help them that doesn't automatically put cash in our pocket. And then suddenly they start to understand our intent is truly to help them succeed. So I just think this is just so important. All of these things seem so fundamental, but I do think they're missing today. And by the way, it doesn't have to just be for, $150 million business relationships. If your biggest client out there today is spending $200,000 with your firm, this is the relationship this is the discussion to have. Let's talk, the last one is really interesting. Step 5 is actually, once you've, kind of taken a look at some solutioning and short and long-term goals, then persuading the stakeholders. Let's talk a little bit about that one, Christoph, if we could, please.
Absolutely. And thank you also for mentioning the CEO connection. That would probably be a discussion on its own, as we did our previous HBR article on what happens when CEOs make sales calls. I'm afraid that my research comes to a little bit different conclusions. Not every CEO is successful here, and the majority I see or I have seen in the last 25 years are still perhaps also a little bit more in a deal maker or a social visitor mode, but we could talk about this any other time.
Yeah, that'll be our next podcast together. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, now I did the pitch for my next podcast. It wasn't the intention. It was just a reaction here to your comment on CEOs. But yes, stakeholders need to be persuaded, but not with the classic heads-on approach. More that you bring up a story which you have jointly developed together with your customers. So it kind of falls almost naturally in place when you look again at the relationship maturity check. At the glance of an eye, you see, here do we have strengths and weaknesses, some deficits or some areas of improvement or great performance. That's the state of the union. Fine. And here are some considerations, why we are in that stage, what we could do and how, short and long-term actions. But what is missing, and I found this particularly helpful when we try to replicate our IBM approach here, the story itself. And when I talk about story, we describe this in the article here in a way that we say the story starts with almost a central message, a newspaper headline or a vision in it's all about a reset of this relationship, or it's all about starting business. And you were talking about the size of the relationship. That doesn't matter, because the concept or the framework of the Triple Fit Canvas can be applied, to my humble opinion, to almost any business relationship, no matter whether it's a large or a small one or industry specific. We had this case with a French pharma startup, and they were doing a couple of sales and market analysis steps, and found these big pharma companies, you know, the Pfizer's, the Astras, the Novartis, Roche, and Sanofi of the world. And they targeted these customers using Triple Fit Canvas in an interesting way, because they didn't have business with these large pharma companies, but they went into discussion and said, we would be interested in hearing your opinion, what the basic performance level would have to look like when we look at our future relationship through the lens of the Triple Fit Canvas. And then the customer said, well, okay, you need to do this, and minimum performance is that. Go. Next step was a deal of 250,000 euro. That's a nice payback for a 2-hour discussion. But it doesn't stop here. If you have an existing relationship, of course, you may not want to go into a somehow uncertain pitch. How about working together? You could at least look at some facts and say, okay, some things went really wrong, but I think we figured out some ideas. And that brings me back to the final step number 5, where you would then complement the story you give with some key activities. I personally like to call these key asks, because key asks is something which is usually not so close to the heart of salespeople, because they quickly tell you, okay, you give me the best product, and then of course I can sell as much as you like. But key asks means you have to think about the relationship from an entrepreneurial point of view. What do I need to have or to make happen that my plan, my storyline is going to work out? And what are asks I need to have approved from my own company, the supplier, but also what are asks where maybe the customer needs to give the approval. And from a process perspective, we found that in most cases, it is sufficient to have 2 or 3 key asks. So in our process, we usually recommend you start with the story headline, and then you go forward with up to 3 key asks. And finally, when you pitch that in the classic elevator pitch, 90 seconds long, you are also going to tell your stakeholder, if you approve what we have just asked, number 1, 2, 3, then this is the projected outcome. That's then leading closer to a financial business case, but of course with much more strategic thinking and background. But you also point out the negative consequences and say, okay, if you don't approve, this is going to happen. Perhaps it's best if I give you a real example.
Sure, yes.
This step 5. So we had the case where, and it's a published case, so I can speak about it. 3M is the customer, and BASF, the German chemical company, is the supplier. And a couple of years ago, we were having really a wonderful conversation with a global account manager. His name is Alan at BASF, and he was already doing a fantastic job with 3M. And then he came to me and said, you wouldn't believe what happened. 3M came to me and said, you're great, but if you really want to make a difference, help us grow in Asia. That's a tough call. It doesn't say, okay, lower your price, or we need this product or that service. Help us grow in Asia. And then we said, okay, what are you going to do next? And then he said, okay, maybe we should give it a shot and analyze this through the lens of the triple fit canvas, which Alan did. Long story short, he found a way to craft this into a story which said, okay, we're going to help you in Asia, grow in Asia by setting up a global innovation network. But it's not about product innovation, it's about commercial innovation. So we help you with a global commercial innovation network. That's the story. In order to do that, we need this, this, this. And if you say yes on both sides, this is going to happen. I can tell you the business grew dramatically. And we're talking about factors, not just a little bit of 5 or 10% more. And if you look at multi-million dollar business relationship like this one, I think this is, again, of course, a wonderful payback for, I would say, almost neutral or penalty-free discussion. We're not going to sell you something for Asia, but we're going to honestly, sincerely explore what needs to be done in all regions of the world. So Alan, finally, he built 3 triple fit canvases. One for the Americas, where the headquarter 3M was, one for Europe, where his company's headquarter was, and then also one for Asia, where the growth, the targeted growth region was. And rolling this up into a master canvas was then the plan forward, and it worked out.
Well, think of that kind of partnership moving forward. And we talked at the beginning about trying to bulletproof a relationship, which we all want to do. I mean, all of the mid-size and large organizations listening us today, they know they have 2 general problems. One, they don't fill enough top of the funnel. It's so hard today to go and get a new logo that's significant and break in. And frankly, leveraging this kind of formal process and methodology for working in partnership with a large client is actually part of your value proposition to that client. Smart clients today, before they make changes, want to trust the partner they're working with. And if we shared this framework as normal, course of business, I think they'd look at it and say, not only is this company going to be happy to win our business, they're going to be happy to keep and help us perform better as an organization. If you can convince, an organization of that, you'll become the partner they invest in, and price won't matter. The second thing I think is just so critical is, I think this kind of framework helps us all stay honest so we don't start to take some of our largest customers for granted. And when there's transitions on a sales organization, or we're always chasing new deals and new logos, sometimes, particularly in mid-sized firms, the attention to servicing that existing large client is not always there. And I think this just encourages a fantastic discipline. Let me ask you this, Christoph, do you ever get engaged where, let's say, whether it's a mid or large size organization, they say, listen, we want to do this, but to showcase to our client that we're sincere and authentic about wanting to do this, we're actually going to bring in a third party to facilitate this discussion for us. Does your firm work with companies to help facilitate the first time you're going to take them through the triple fit canvas?
Yes, absolutely. And it's a great question you're bringing up, because usually and we're all long in the industry to know that when companies hear, okay, here's a new framework, everybody's afraid, okay, now I have to spend tons of money to get this done. I'm a big believer in do it yourself, which means the answer is yes, we would certainly appreciate to kind of set the standard or work in an initial rollout of 3-4 key interventions. But then I believe a framework is only useful if you can learn it by heart and apply it all by yourself. So I shouldn't probably say that, but it's really simple, not simplistic, but simple. You can memorize the 9 building blocks. You can memorize the 3 levels, the planning fit, the execution fit, and resource fit. And you can then also memorize the 5 process steps. I would say once you have understood how this process works, you may certainly go deeper and learn it in one of our master classes, for example, or we do trainer programs. But then we would say it is absolutely the idea that any organization who wants to work with that framework works in a do-it-yourself mode. Of course,
Right.
we have a growing community. And in the last 2 years, you see here a poster of the canvas on the back of my wall. We hadn't have a chance to work in a physical environment. There were no face-to-face meetings. So what do you do to promote the concept? And based on many, many customer requests, we just developed the digital tool, the same thing in a digital version, which works very, very well and is applied now in many of the companies I was featuring in the article. Of course, I was and I am a paid consultant for these companies, but I think they wouldn't use it if they wouldn't see some value in it. But long story short, I think an initial facilitation can help, especially when the relationship is really, really significant, or it may have a couple of critical incidents. So you don't want to have a referee, but more a neutral person who can really say, okay, are you really sure that this is the only way? More acting like a challenger and giving also the content. I'm a big fan of the challenger sale, by the way, but I always say a little bit tongue-in-cheek, the triple fit canvas gives you the content for these discussions, which I think is, again, not a competition of frameworks, but it's just about the question, what content are you going to talk about in a real strategic business discussion with your client? Is it product focused, inside out, more of the same, or is it customer centric, what the customer experiences? And then you want to talk about more than just features, functions, benefits, value proposition, and deal. You want to talk about the whole execution, also processes, systems, or structures, knowledge, the resources, and of course the strategies, the relationships. So all the three levels, which I think, if I would have to summarize this in 3 principles, if companies really want to make a difference, they should think about how do we redirect our planning in a more collaborative way? How do we reconfigure our execution so it's absolutely 5-star for our customers? And how do we also reallocate the resources? So again, planning, execution, and resource, this is what you want to have in mind. And then I must say, it works in pretty every industry I have seen so far.
Well, we have a much more tailored down view. We have something we coach companies on called a health check. And I'd say your whole system is kind of a health check for us on steroids times 10. But it's very difficult to envision how this wouldn't work well. Because at the core, the core value or principle is we want to understand what's happening with our client better so we can help them get to a better future. If they know that's our intent and we have their trust and they see us as credible, I can't imagine anybody wouldn't want to do this, Christoph. It just seems so inherently logical to me, which is, by the way, why I was so excited to speak to you today after I read this article a couple of months ago. And clearly, after today's podcast, Christoph, lots of folks are going to want to learn more about you and what you're doing at INSEAD and also what you're doing with your consulting firm. How do they learn more about you?
Well, simply visit INSEAD's Marketing and Sales Excellence Initiative website. INSEAD has a research section where you can find us. It's called MSEI, Marketing and Sales Excellence Initiative. Here we work together with a number of partner companies who are exclusive network partners, all with the same goal. We want to promote here world-class marketing and sales approaches, share in a safe environment. So this is kind of a sales-free zone. We're all in sharing mode, here. We're also doing, and that's maybe of interest for some of the audience here, every 2 years, we are launching a consortia where we talk about breakthrough business relationships. And by coincidence, April next year, we have the next round. It's an 18-month consortium where we allow just one company per industry. So there is one IT company, one consumer good company, one apparel company, one financial services company, one insurance company. So just one leading company with the intention to advance their sales practices when it comes to these key relationships. And you can also find more information, of course, about this, what we call BBR consortium on the INSEAD website. The other area where interested folks may find more information is our little consulting practice here. We have set up this as a startup now since 2.5 years. Just before COVID hit, it's called Valuecreator.com. There you can find all our activities. We have master classes, we have trainer programs, we have annual summits. So it's really also a community which is growing here every month, adding new users. And we are absolutely pleased to see that many of these triple fit practitioners come back, just telling us, you wouldn't believe what happened. I didn't really trust this at the first time, but I was pleasantly surprised. So it's also an honest statement. And every year we invite our community to share their successes with us. We give out an award where we, of course, validate this with the jury and also talk to the customer. Is this real? So really very, very heavy evaluation. But I think these two touch points, the INSEAD MSEI initiative and the Valuecreator platform, could certainly offer more insights for folks who are interested to learn more.
Well, thank you, Christoph and team. Those links will be in the show notes for today, as always. And Christoph, one of the joys I have about running this podcast is I just get to talk to fantastic folks who've kind of dedicated their professional lives to improving the performance and professionalism of sales. You're absolutely one of those folks. It's been an amazing pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you so very much for your time.
Thank you so much. The pleasure was all mine. Thank you.
And folks, thank you for listening today. So as always, we hope that you've gleaned some things that you can take right now and apply to you and your business and your industry to dramatically improve business performance. And that's really the intent of the Selling Well podcast. That's why we exist. And we know we do certain things well, and we know there's lots of other ways we can improve, but we want to hear from you. So if you have any ideas as to what I can personally do to make this more valuable to you, I wonder if you'd do me a real favor and provide us some constructive criticism at this email address, markcox@inthefunnel.com. markcox@inthefunnel.com. That's my personal email address. I check that, and we really appreciate constructive feedback, and we're tough. So tell us the truth, and we'll make this better for you. Thanks to everybody, and we'll see you next time.